Good day, student researchers, and welcome to our recorded sessions in Inquiries, Investigations, and Immersion. This is Sir Robert T. Salvador, and this day we are to discuss how to write the conclusions and recommendations. You are now on the last part of the research paper, the conclusions and recommendations. And this afternoon, our main objective is to find out how to effectively write the parts of conclusions and recommendations. But first things first, we are to know what are the sections under conclusion and recommendations. So we have the following. Number one is the summary of findings. So we have the summary of findings. While the results and discussion discuss thoroughly and comprehensively the findings and results of your study, this time, under the conclusion and recommendations part, we have the summary of findings section, wherein you are to summarize major results and major findings of your study. All right, so the summary of findings present brief statements. I will highlight this, brief statements, meaning coming from your results and discussion, you are to summarize the major findings and put it here under the summary of findings in the conclusion part of the paper. This includes, you need to mention the main purpose of your study, the population or respondents, the sampling technique, the period of the study, as well as, most important of all, you have to present the summary of major findings of the study. Next, transition on the most important part or section of the conclusion, which is the conclusions. Okay, these are based on the findings of the study. When we say conclusions, it could mean generalizations. It could mean inference. It could mean implications of your results. In here, this is written in clear and simple language. No highfalutin word anymore. Direct sentences about the conclusions. We are referring to the answers to your research questions. So what can you conclude on your research question number 1, 2, 3, and so on? So another important note, researcher, is that you are to tell or you are to write under the conclusions and recommendation if the hypothesis is accepted or rejected. Okay? And we only have hypothesis per inferential questions. Again, inferential questions ask for significant relationship or significant differences, meaning we are to write or tell if the hypothesis of the inferential research questions were rejected or accepted. Okay, that is how we state the conclusions. And finally, we have the recommendations. So, only 3 sections under the conclusion and recommendations class. This is the most, the easiest part to write in a research study because we have the basis already. We have your results and discussion, which is the most challenging, on the other hand, to write. But this time, under the conclusion and recommendations, you are to only base your writing on the previous sections, which is the results and discussion. So let's move. We have the recommendations. So these are logical, doable, and relevant statements about what can you recommend based on the result of your study. So you may enumerate suggestions that you can give based on the findings of the study. And take note, in writing suggestions, you have to consider the beneficiaries of the study written in the significant of the study. Okay? How can this study answer the question, how can this study impact or benefit your beneficiaries? Okay? What should they do based on the findings of the study? So you are here to write your suggestions under the recommendations section. So at this point, I will share with you from our sample research papers titled Language Learning Strategies Use and English Proficiency of Senior High School Students, the conclusion and recommendations part of this paper. Alright, but first things first, we are to begin with what is the main purpose of this study. So it's written on the statement of the problem that they are to assess, the researchers are to assess the language learning strategies used and the level of English proficiency of senior high school students. So we have two main important variable here. Okay, these are the variables of the study, and we have the senior high school students as our respondents. All right. So we have the senior high school students as our respondents. Next, we have our research questions. So the researchers sought to answer the following questions. Remember, class, that the research questions or the statement of the problem is the heart of your research paper because we align everything here, including the conclusions and recommendations of the paper. It is written in order based on the statement of the problem or the specific research questions. So take note that you have also written your results and discussion in accordance to the research questions, meaning the research questions number 1 will come first, followed by research questions number 2, and so on. All right. So this same order in writing the conclusions and recommendation. So you enumerate the results, you conclude per research question. So these are the research questions of the study featured this afternoon. What are the language learning strategies used when the students are grouped according to sex and strand and when taken as a whole? So these are the variables. Next, the level of English proficiency when they are grouped according to the same variables. And we have the significant difference, okay? Significant difference when the senior high school students are grouped according to sex and strand. We only find for the significant difference based on our variables, not as a whole, okay? So meaning, we are to determine the language learning strategies used and its significant difference based on sex and strand only, not as a whole. So do the same significant difference in the level of English proficiency based on the same variable. And of course, for the relationship, we are trying here to test for the relationship between language learning strategies and our another variable, level of English proficiency. So take note, class, that in research questions 3, 4, and 5, we have the inferential research questions, meaning there must be a hypothesis for each research question here. Okay? While research questions number 1 and 2 are descriptive research questions, which does not require us to accept or reject hypothesis later on. only for research questions number 3, 4, and 5. So meaning, research questions number 3, 4, and 5 will be tested using statistical tools under significant differences and significant relationships. So let's move on the conclusions and recommendation portion of this paper. All right. So take a look, examine the conclusions and recommendations of this paper. Have the preliminary part, which tell what's the part all about. Okay? Next, for the summary of findings, notice the tip, or take a look at this. On the paragraph, on the first paragraph, it mentions the main purpose of the study, or again, it reiterated the statement of the problem. So you begin your summary of findings by reiterating again the main purpose of the paper. Complete the what, when, where, who, why, and how of your paper. Next, okay, so based on your results, okay, the first variable is again language learning strategies. So based on your results, as you have written in your results and discussion portion, summarize it, okay? Summarize the findings for the first variable, language learning strategies. So in summary, you have to discuss the interpretations, moderate to high, okay? As well as you discuss if the comparison between your variables, okay? Male and female students. How about the strands? Who got the highest? ABM, Humes, and so on. So you have to discuss per variable or per research questions the summary of findings. So it is also written in your results and discussion. That is why, again, this is the easiest part of the research paper to write because you have the basis already under your results and discussions. So this time, under the conclusions and recommendations, summary of findings, you are to only summarize the findings, meaning write the major findings of your study at this portion, at this section, in this section. All right. Next, so another paragraph for another variable. Okay, we have the level of English proficiency. So compare and contrast again the results per variable. Let's say we have the success, male and female. Again, very important is the interpretation scale, okay? And of course, the implications. So you put again implications here. So you have noticed only one statement, right? One sentence only, but very meaty. Okay? It is substantial enough to tell the major findings of the study. Next. Okay, compare and contrast in one sentence again the results per strand. Okay, level of English proficiency per strand. So in just one sentence, the researcher was able to write a summary of the results and discussion based on English proficiency, in terms of English proficiency. So overall, senior high school students, where do they belong? They are independent users of English language. So, take a look at this. Under the level of, or yes, language learning strategies used, the researcher only wrote how many paragraphs? 1, 2, 3, and 4 paragraphs. Wow, 5. On the level of English proficiency, you could summarize the results into 3 paragraphs. So, take note class that when we say summary, the shorter, the better. Okay? As much as possible, the sentences you have put in there must be substantial enough for the summary of findings. Look at this one. This time, these are for the research questions, inferential research questions 3, 4, and 5. You are to only tell if the variables have significant differences or significant relationships. So follow this. Indicated no significant differences for both variables. Like that. So your goal for research questions number 4 is the strand or the level of English proficiency. Are there significant differences? Write it down like this. And do not forget to write transitional devices. We have on the other hand, finally, so these are transitional devices that could help you connect sentences to another sentences. Next, finally, okay, for your last, the research question, you write the summary of findings here, right? So that's how a simple we write the summary of findings, which is a section under the conclusions and recommendation. So, sir, this time, how do we write the conclusions of the paper? So again, we base the conclusions on the summary of findings as well as on the results and discussion. Okay, so when we say again conclusions, this means what can we infer? What can we suggest? What can we say? What can we generalize as a researcher based on the results? So what if the female students garnered high language learning strategies use or high English proficiency compared to the male students? What does that mean? So this time in conclusions class, this is where you write generalizations or inference about your results. Okay? So do it like this. Begin your conclusions this way. Okay? Based on the findings of the study, the following conclusions are drawn. Okay. And when we write conclusions again, we follow the order of our research questions. Meaning we conclude first on for the research question number 1. Okay? And write it down in paragraph format. Okay? Paragraph format kita. Okay, so for conclusions, we have a research question number 1. Senior high school students use all language learning strategies from moderate to high. Okay? And then you write your inference as evident. While the respondents directly involve the target language and perform mental processes, they also provide indirect support in English language learning. So this is based on the theories presented on this paper on indirect and direct strategies. So based on the theories, based on the literature that you have read, put an inference, okay? Write an inference based on your results. The senior high school students say are using language learning strategies from moderate to high. What can you conclude based on that result? So this time the researcher wrote, as evident, while the respondents directly involve target language and perform mental processes, they also provide indirect support in English language learning. So this is already the conclusion part of the paper. The researcher was able to put a generalization or an inference based on the results and discussion for research question number 1. Proceed. Okay, next. Research question number 2, we have our another variable, level of English language proficiency. Again, the researcher here mentioned that the respondents is on the Vantage level or B2 level. What is the inference now if they are on the B2 level? Okay, write it here. This is important in writing the conclusions and recommendation, you must have the implications or the reference and further discuss what does that mean. If these students are identified as independent users of English language, what does that mean? So it means in this sentence. So this is again based on the level of interpretation, the verbal interpretation, and the descriptors of this paper under English proficiency. That is why, class, I suggest that you must have a clear interpretation scale of your variables. So you must write descriptions, verbal descriptions, and the descriptors of your levels in terms of, let's say, English proficiency. Next, okay, research question number 3. As mentioned, we write the conclusions and we state if the hypothesis is accepted or rejected. So this time, the researcher wrote, no significant differences in the language learning strategies used were found. Okay, thus, very important, you're right. Thus, the researcher failed to reject. The correct term is failed to reject the null hypothesis, meaning uh, we accept the null hypothesis. The correct term to be used in your paper is failed to reject the null hypothesis. Next, okay, this is in terms of English proficiency. There is a significant differences. What can you conclude as researcher? This time the researcher used the transitional device, hence the researcher reject the null hypothesis. So meaning there is a statement telling if the null hypothesis is rejected or accepted or failed to reject and reject. Okay? We reject the null hypothesis if there is a significant difference or significant relationship between our variables. We fail to reject the null hypothesis if we found out no significant differences between our variables. Okay? So this time, for research question number 5, no significant relationship was found. Okay? No significant relationship was found between language learning strategies and English proficiency. Therefore, use therefore, the researcher failed to reject the null hypothesis. Again, if there is no significant relationship or no significant differences found, we write failed to reject the null hypothesis. If there is, on the other hand, significant differences found, we write reject the null hypothesis. So that's it for conclusions, okay? Conclusions, we have the summary of findings and the latter part, conclusions, okay? This time we move on with the last portion of your conclusions and recommendations part, the recommendation section, okay? Begin in writing the recommendation section this way. And class, we write paragraph forms, okay? In paragraph forms. So, what can we suggest for the senior high school students to do? Okay? Not just 1, 2 statements there. Write comprehensively what can you suggest per beneficiaries of your study. Next. Okay. How about the English language teachers or the teachers as one of your beneficiaries? How can they benefit? Or what can you suggest? What are the recommendations can you suggest them to do based on the results of your study? So you write it down there. Moreover, how about the department heads, coordinators, principals, supervisors, and other stakeholders? What can you suggest? Okay? Based on the results of your paper. So, in writing the recommendations of the paper, you do not have to write like you write like it's mandatory. No, you write like you are suggesting things they may implement. Put it that way. they may implement, may use methods, possibility of uh, doing your suggestions. Okay? So I believe that's it. Okay? That's it for the conclusions and recommendations. Most important thing is your study must direct into something. Look at this one. This study in particular is will develop a development plan to for the students to succeed in English language learning. So, a development plan to aid students to succeed in English language learning. Right, so that's it for conclusions and recommendations. See you next week, my dear senior high school students. God bless you and congratulations in advance on your graduations. See you next week in our synchronous sessions. I'm looking forward to see you as well on your final oral defense. For now, Excelsior, ever upwards. This has been Sir Robert. Good day, everyone.